Mr. Robert Spencer, welcome here on Daring Question.
Thank you.
And first of all, I just want you to introduce yourself to our viewers in the Arab world.
I am Robert Spencer, the director of Jihad Watch, which you can find on the internet at jihadwatch.org. And that is a news and commentary site that is updated many times daily with information about jihad activity all around the world and the belief system that inspires that jihad activity. And this, of course, is information that in many parts of the Western world in particular, it is not known why these things are happening, and there's a great deal of deceit and obfuscation about it. And so I attempt to clear that up. And I've also written 9 books about Islam, jihad, and terrorism.
Right. Some Muslims compare the violence in the Quran to the violence in the Old Testament. They say, look, it's all the same. So if you're going to condemn the violence in the Quran, why you don't condemn the Old Testament with the same measure?
There are several aspects to that. One is that there are no Jewish or Christian exegetes. There are no Jewish or Christian scholars ever who have ever read the book of Joshua and said, you see, the prophet, he cleared out these cities, and so therefore we must do the same thing and fight against our enemies in the same way. In other words, no one has ever, no Jew or Christian has ever taken those passages as meaning that these are instructions for the way he should behave as a believer today.
Right.
The passages in the Old Testament that are violent are descriptive rather than prescriptive. In other words, they describe various things that were done by various prophets, and it's been problematic for Jewish and Christian scholars all through history as to how God could order that kind of thing. Generally, they have understood the passages in a spiritual way as parables in a certain sense for fighting against sin in one's soul. But never have they understood them as instructions, whereas in the Quran, the believers are told, are ordered by God to make war against the unbelievers. And this is a prescription, in other words, not just a description of somebody doing something that is not necessarily to be imitated.
Right.
And so that's one of the most important differences. Also, of course, for Christians, the New Testament comes after the Old. And so I've had so many Muslims say, how can you condemn the practice of stoning when stoning is prescribed in the Old Testament? And I say, well, I can condemn it because in the 8th chapter of the Gospel of John, the Lord Jesus condemns it. And essentially, and says that makes it impossible by setting a standard that no one can live up to in order to carry it out. And so we, as Christians, read the Old Testament in light of the New, and that changes our understanding of it to a tremendous degree. But it also must be said that even in the rabbinic tradition in Judaism, these passages have been spiritualized, and there is no tradition in anywhere that takes them as literal instructions. And so in the Islamic tradition, unfortunately, there is no such tradition anywhere of the spiritualizing of Quranic passages that exhort to violence, or any blunting of their force, their literal force, to incite the believers to commit violence.
So you see it different. It's not the same kind of violence.
Exactly.
And some Muslims are trying to defend Islam, saying that, look at these attacks are carried against UK, United States, countries who have wars against Muslim countries. So they brought it upon themselves rather than it's coming from Islam. It's just a reaction to what the United States is doing in the Middle East and other countries, and what the UK is doing in the Middle East. And how you respond to that?
Well, the problem is, before the US was doing anything in the Middle East, before the UK was doing anything in the Middle East, there was jihad. And there was jihad against the West. There was jihad against Christian Europe. The Ottomans were in Vienna in 1683. And that was the high point of their advance into Europe. But they weren't reacting to U.S. policy. There was no U.S. The reality is that all the jihads today are defensive. It's true. And that's a function of Islamic theology. Because in Islamic law, only the caliph can declare offensive jihad. And there is no caliph, not since 1924 when the
Right.
Turkish government abolished the office.
Right.
And so there is no one authorized in the Islamic world to declare offensive jihad against non-Muslims.
Okay.
And so the jihadis have an obligation, if they want to portray their jihad as correct Islamically, they have to portray it as defensive. Because defensive jihad, you need no approval for, you need no permission for.
Right.
It becomes the obligation of every individual Muslim as soon as an Islamic land is attacked.
Right.
So the grievance theater that we see in the Islamic world, the complaining about various atrocities of the West, the endless complaint whining about what Israel has done or what the United States has done or what the UK has done, it really has a purpose, and that is to justify the jihads from a theological standpoint within Islam.
Okay.
But it is incorrect to say that if the West were to stop doing these things, then the jihad would cease.
So you see it as excuses used by terrorists to, like, kind of propaganda of their
Yes.
jihad strategy
Oh, yes.
among Muslims?
Yes, quite so. And the pretexts always shift, but the jihad remains.
Okay.
If Israel were to cease to exist tomorrow, they would wage jihad against Spain and find provocation to do
Right.
so. If the United States were to withdraw all its troops from the whole world tomorrow,
Right.
they would find some other offense somehow
Okay.
and continue to wage jihad, because jihad is a responsibility for Muslims. And so it's not something that is going to end. And ultimately, there are many attempts to restore the caliphate.
Right.
Even Mullah Omar was named the caliph in Afghanistan in
Right.
1996.
Right.
And not many people recognize him as such. But if someone were to grow more powerful than he is, then it's possible he could attract that kind of following and then declare an offensive jihad.
Thank you so much for being with us. And
Thank you.
Wish you all the best.
You too. Thank
God
you.
bless you.